dear colleagues. We're beginning our roundtable. Financial support for territory development plans. My name is Klimanov Vladimir Viktorovich. I'm director of Institute of Public Finance Reform and head of the Department of State Regulation of Economy of Russian Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. And today I have the honor to moderate the table where we try to get together authorities of members of federal authorities, of regional authorities, experts, and those people who are really and truly involved in implementation of specific territory development plans. You know that territory development plans are always, to some extent, referring to some rural areas, and they're not very high on agenda, and creating a certain comprehensive territory development plan, we're getting faced with a wide range of questions and issues related to how these financial sources should be put together, how federal budget and regional budget can take their play at this, and how can we engage extra budgetary funds. And it all is all the time a subject for a good discussion. And there are numerous plans, and they have different types. Just for some time, we have had some state programs. Among more than 40 state programs, we have at least 5 of them that are directly devoted to development of territories. Far East Development Program, the Caucasus Development, Kaliningrad Region Development, and Crimea Development, and other programs. And recently there have been launched a new program for development of rural areas, and it's been a targeted program as well. It has different tools as well. There are different types of instruments and tools to develop territories that are a part of national projects now, which is a subject of a wide discussion. There is a range of events about to happen related to the fact that the strategy of spatial development has recently been approved in Russia, and there is a number of issues now that require special attention by federal authorities, and that requires some financial aspects, urban agglomerations and macro-regions, and there's a number of other different tools that our participants will speak about, I suppose. I really hope that our discussion will be really lively and working, because here we have those people who are really and truly involved in the projects. Let me introduce you to them first, and then we can start our discussion. Let me begin with myself. Елена Николаевна Петрикова. Елена Mikhailovna, Petrikova, advisor to the Deputy Minister of Agriculture, one of the developers of the Territories Development Program. Andrei Nikolaevich Klepych, Deputy Chairman of Внешэкономбанк, he is economist, Chief Economist of Внешэкономбанк. Natalia Trunova, Vice President, Center for Strategic Research and Development. Dmitry Yurievich Zemlyansky, Chairman of the Council for the Study of Productive Forces of the Russian Ministry of Economic Development. Vitaly Vladimirovich Tushinov, Deputy Governor of Vologda region, responsible for economy. Alexei Anatolievich Yelin, Acting Director of the Department of Territorial Planning of the one of the ministers of Russian Federation, and Mr. Ladozhenko, Yenisei Department Cooperation of Siberia. And my first question will refer to the Minister of Economic Development of Russia, of course. Alexei Anatolievich, I have already started mentioning the tools and the mechanisms of raising funds for territory development. How do they feel today? What is going on with them? Are any actions required to reformat them, to mobilize them, maybe to focus them on some specific points? So what is going on there right now? Good afternoon, colleagues. Let me begin by saying that the strategy was approved, indeed. There is industry-specific approach right now, and we are convinced about it. And the main motto of this strategy is attention to territories, attention to specificities of territories, and differentiated approach to different types of territories that have different functions. Based on that, the strategy of spatial development in the plan of implementation of this strategy, and that is going to be approved by the government troops very soon, there are new tools getting available, new mechanisms of getting available to develop these territories. Let me dwell upon a few of them. First of all, we have geostrategical approach to different territories, and we have a state program related to special macro-regions and different isolated micro-regions. And since we have geostrategical territories, and they are almost all of them located next to the border, we must focus a lot on border cooperation, inter-border cooperation, and Ministry of Economic Development is currently working on development programs for these territories. The other type of territories are territories like our regions, our constituents of Russian Federation. And to implement the strategy, I'm sure you've heard all about it, we are developing and we are preparing the documents, some individual plans of territories development, the ones that have problems with socio-economic development. These territories that require special attention by Russian Federation, we need to tackle these issues. Special plans related to growth centers. There are many discussions and disputes when we were developing the strategy for spatial development. You remember it, agglomerations, balanced development. These centers of growth are there, and our experts were saying that they are under-financed right now, and we need to create individual development plans for cities and urban agglomerations. There's also a number of other mechanisms, macro-regions, inter-regional projects. Some of projects are not on national projects right now. The complex plan of highway infrastructure, this project has an inter-regional significance. It is really important for all the constituents on for macro regions, and we're developing like specific plans. There are plans of development of specific cities and constituents and regions, the Baikal region, for instance, and strategies to develop federal districts, and we're adding more and more. But there's such an abundance of them. We need to hammer out a mechanism to manage them, to introduce adjustments if needed, and this method is underway right now. And there is no alternative to this approach. This is the only approach we can have. We believe that we must create specific plans, clear plans for every territory. Plans should be split by territories, and we should focus on specificities of every region. The matter of priorities, plans that were adopted earlier, for instance, and current plans, we send requests to regions and we receive their feedback. And here we need to develop the system of assessment, assessment of efficiency of action plan proposed. Oftentimes it happens so that the region offers a lot of infrastructural objects and other objects that are really needed, but as a result of realization of these objects, added value does not get generated, and the economy does not get improved in this region, despite the fact that the infrastructure has been implemented. And we see it sometimes. So here, of course, and we've been speaking about it a lot in the strategy of spatial development, we're trying to hammer out the right approach, and we should prioritize those actions that will help social economic development and development of the economy. Second question, when we're speaking about these plans, very often we're paying a lot of attention to federation, to the national plans, but it's not the only thing. If we look at efficiency of current state programs on different territories, we see that many of them are being executed on quite a poor level. Why is that? Because unfortunately competences are lacking, because for every program there are certain rules in the regions, and the budget that is being raised is not that huge, and we need to have a proper level of coordination in order to use the subsidies in the right way. And even those plans that are funded, they are not always executed in the right way. And here we have a question. Maybe it will make sense to arrange for an office, a competence center on the federal level. So we're discussing it as well right now. As to funding, cities development plans of different territories, they don't always have funds. They're not always well funded. Currently, we have state programs. Some program documents have funds raised for them, but these numerous plans, they are confirmed by the government and by different acts. And as to regional acts and regional plans, they're not very high on the priority list for authorities. And here we have a question like how to put them up on the level of priorities. And here we have a proposal, and it is being discussed a lot now, that there is a need to put a linkage between these plans from municipal level to macro-regional level. Maybe they should be put on one big program document, on a comprehensive document that would be, on the one hand, an analytical document that would put together all action plans and all regional programs and federal programs, and that would include actions that are responsible for regions, for territories. As a result, we will have a chance to comprehensively develop territories, and we will have a chance to assess the results of these action plans and actions taken. Because currently, when there is an action plan, there are 10 authorities responsible for it, and 5 of the actions are implemented and 5 of them are not implemented. And inefficiency of this plan, well, nobody is responsible for it as a result. So it's a very interesting work, and we have to continue to do it. And we have laid some foundations to the development of this spatial development, and we know that it has been an important step. But in order to make sure that these tools work, we need to work more. We need to cooperate with a wide range of participants. Alexei Anatolievich, can I ask you a clarifying question? I agree with you that the question of priorities for funding for territories development is very important. Who should prioritize? Who should set the priorities? Who's responsible for it? Who should choose the territories? Who should decide which regions and constituents come first? When developing this prioritization, we understand that this approach must be split. If it's not split into different regional authorities, if there is no good communication, multi-level communication between different constituents of Russian Federation, when we're speaking about development of agglomerations and municipal levels, without these communication channels, it will not work. In this sense, the first experience that gives a lot of hope, that looks very promising, and even if it's a breakthrough for us, was a development of not an industry-related program, but a territorial program of agricultural areas development. And we are going to discuss it today. So just adoption of the process by all stakeholders and generation of the related system of management, the management of different authorities, and holistic monitoring. This is what will help implement these programs. When we're speaking about city development program, even urban development program, there is a number of projects that are being executed by institutions of development, some municipal authorities, and the constituent who has the authority, and we know the system of interbudgetary relations, and the majority of funds is being transferred to the constituent, and the many infrastructure objects, for instance, highways that are connecting a number of centers or a number of constituents and regions. It's quite costly. And unfortunately, constructing this highway is almost impossible without participation by the federation, by the national government. And there are very few examples where it works without the national government. So here we do need a comprehensive work. We need efforts of all the regions. We need efforts of the national government as well. And we need to clearly state goals and objectives. Maybe somewhere we have some priorities that relate to some authorities' purposes. Thank you very much. Since you have mentioned development of agricultural territories, let me ask a question to Yelena Mikhailovna. Yelena Mikhailovna, you are very much involved in the development of this program in the capacity of an expert. You know all the ins and outs in the Ministry of Agriculture. But we are experts who do not work with agriculture, and when this targeted program became available, we got surprised. We understand the logic, how the programs come together, how they get generated, the development of different territories and different areas, but there's a program to develop some type of territories. So it used to be split by regions, by territories. Now it's split by different industries. For instance, it's split into agriculture. Could you tell us what it all is about? And why is this program designed exactly this way? Why is it devoted and dedicated to agriculture? How is it going to be executed? Good afternoon, colleagues. Indeed, in late May this year, in execution of the decrees of the President as a result of meetings in Stavropol, in spatial development, according to spatial development program, according to sustainable development of agricultural areas, we have proven the agricultural areas development program. This program has such a notion as agricultural area, agricultural agglomeration, which includes rural areas, different countrysides and rural areas and different settlements, with a population up to 30,000 people, within 30,000 people, except for administrative centers and constituents of Russian Federation that do not fall into the category of agricultural areas or rural areas. In the foundation of this program, we have main strategic goals and objectives that are aimed at, first of all, large-scale nationwide purposes, and second, to development of rural areas, agricultural areas, to creation of centers of economic growth in rural areas. Main strategic goals are creating the income, average income in rural area up to 80%, increase the share of residential area for the population. Unfortunately, this indicator is very low. Primarily, it includes the corresponding indicators on utilities, on heating services, sewage. Unfortunately, only 38% of population have hot water and hot shower. So the targeted indicator right now is 50%. And the third level is very strategic in terms of spatial safety and security, to preserve and maybe increase the share of rural population as a share of overall population of Russia. Our program has 8 structural elements that involve 3 regional targeted programs and 5 related projects. Main principles in the foundation of the state program, the principle of initiative budgeting. Initiative comes from people. All the questions of social economic development that are matters of concern to them, that they pay attention to, according to initiative of people, they should submit these questions, these concerns that they have, and as a result we shape projects and we execute them. First of all, we execute projects on separate structural elements, and first of all, this project is dedicated to sorting out social economic development. The first element
it is actually related to initiative budgeting for monitoring of rural areas. So we are going to develop a certain standard of quality for rural population. We will create typology, and if some changes need to be added or update the current standards, we will do it in order to understand what we should do, what the arrangement should be of the infrastructure, what kind of configuration it should have, and it's related to all kinds of infrastructure, social and transport and other things. So we are going to develop an analytic database so that we could involve as many citizens as possible for that, because this would be good to have a pilot model of target budgeting, so that it would be a bottom-up approach, and the population could be actively involved. Then we are going to identify a range of issues that are of highest concern for people, and of course funding. To develop residential areas and improve the level of comfort. So we are going to diversify different instruments as part of this program, and we are going to use both private and public funding. So we are going to use rural mortgage model, and we will be able to raise 7.5 points of borrowings while giving 2.5 funds from the public budget. So the people could use this mortgage with 3% of interest rate, and we already have identified the minimum investment for the mortgage. So it means that more than 2,000 of families would be able to improve their residential conditions. So these are the instruments that we are going to provide, and thus at least 200,000 of families will get their accommodation in rural areas. Another interesting thing is to improve employability and employment level of the people. So we are going to conclude contracts with agricultural employers, and they can provide internship for the students. We can provide salaries to the students, and provide accommodation if they want to work there. And we have very good experience implemented by Voronezh Agrarian University. They are quite advanced in this regard. They started experiment together with a company based on EcoNiva, and the latest survey showed that a lot of students that study at agrarian universities are not really willing to work in the countryside. So this pilot experiment in Voronezh showed that today we have a lot of opportunities to make young people interested so that they could go back to the country. And if we provide good conditions for these people, then they would be happy to do it. So as a result of this experiment that took part in that pilot project, all the students came back to the rural areas, and they really liked it, so they stayed there. And it was very interesting for them to get the work experience when they started working at a large agrarian holding. Then another element is improving engineering infrastructure and transport infrastructure. I'm not going to elaborate on this in detail because these are the elements that were included in the previous program for sustainable rural area development. I just wanted to mention a very important structural element of our public program, because it has a lot of funding and it is aimed at improving the lifestyle in rural areas. At the moment, we are working together with the constituencies of the Russian Federation, so we are finalizing this comprehensive plans for countryside development. We are now at the approval stage, so there'll be a target funding using subsidies from different authorities, and this would involve funds for the construction of engineering infrastructure, and thus will improve the lifestyle in the rural areas. It will help to attract more resources to the countryside. We'll be able to build new facilities in the countryside, and it will also create good conditions to attract investments and creating workplaces and giving jobs. So it's about improving the infrastructure, increasing the population living in the rural areas. These are our expectations. So we'll attract investments, we'll create workplaces, and this will have to demonstrate its efficiency. This is what we are working at the moment, and Vitaly will probably confirm it, because we have over 23 projects implemented there. So we worked closely with the regional authorities, and there were a lot of things that we discussed about, trying to find new instruments, trying to make solutions, and once we establish all the rules, we'll launch this process. I just have one question. You mentioned that the budgeting will be one of the major mechanisms to attract funding. So what should it involve, this budgeting, initiative budgeting? So initiative budgeting is based on the model that we developed, and it would involve training for municipalities and citizens that are willing to work together with municipalities in order to develop rural areas and the countryside. So that's the major principle of initiative budgeting, so that it is a bottom-up approach and it comes from the citizens. So the initiative comes from the citizens that live there. That's a very amazing thing. We underestimated this. We should think about it. Well, since we take turns, I would like to give the floor to Valery, and he represents Vologda region. You had lots of initiatives related to mono-cities development, agglomeration in Vologda and Chernipovets region. So how do you stimulate the development of economy via territorial development? Thank you very much. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk on behalf of the regions, and I guess it's the most interesting thing. It's true, we have many stories to share, and this model of project management and initiative budgeting started many years ago, before the public project started. We had these practices over assemblies. For example, the governors have meetings with our companies, business organizations, and we develop a strategy for the regional development during such meetings. So when we held those meetings, we realized it was very important to set up a center of competences that could deal with decision-making, because initiative budgeting policies might lead the region into the dead end. No, I'm not going to criticize. Yeah, I feel that there is very interesting discussion being started. You know, you can't just do what the population wants. Once we understand that this area will die 10 or 15 years later, we don't see the need for the development of this area. So it might sound very tough, but we made this decision. So if you want to manage the system, it's very important to delegate certain authorities. So we removed all the municipal functions, apart from 2 cities, and I'm sorry that we didn't do, and began to prepare all the documents for territorial planning ourselves. So we took those authorities, like I said, because we're speaking about the budgetary effect. So the first budgetary effect was this. For example, if we spent 359 million rubles, and this was our regional money, also some more budget was needed to develop the territorial planning documents. And you know that we have to organize tenders and bidding. So it's a long process. We couldn't really reach 100% indicator set up by the president. So when we switched to the new system, we spent 60 million rubles and prepared all the documents for territorial planning for the whole region. So we tried to optimize our expenses, to consolidate our areas. So we set up our budgetary institution, and it's a center of competences for us. We are sure about the quality of the documentation developed by that institution. So we removed all sorts of subjective intervention from the rural areas, because, you know, if you didn't have a chance to agree on gas utilities, sometimes you face with a situation when that part of work has been sold. So that's why we began to develop these territorial plans of development for the region overall. And our Department of Economics and Strategic Planning began to analyze and review this approach for the purpose of real economic development, whether it really brings good results. And this is our Vologda region. It actually looks like the Russian Federation. We don't have Sakhalin and Crimea together with Kamchatka, but anyway, it looks very similar to the map of the Russian Federation. So we identified point of growth, and here you can see all the points of growth in Vologda region that were important for us, and we focused on them closely. And then it became clear how to develop our agglomeration. What is agglomeration for us? It's important to understand, to focus on 2 biggest centers, Vologda and Cherepovets. So they are bigger cities with more than 300,000 people. So It makes the biggest percentage of the region, and the logistics is concentrated there. We have Trans-Siberian Railway, we have the motor highway going both to the north, St. Petersburg, and across the Asia, so to say, so-called Silk Way. So, you know, people are speaking about different connection points, and this became clear. This helped us understand, develop areas that are located along the biggest highways. So when we develop federal roads, it might create some contradictions. For example, Roosevelt used to say that good roads really spoil people. So I can tell you that it is truth. When we got the best federal highways of the first class, we realized that all the other roads that, let's say, belong to category 3 or 4 were something that local people were not happy about, were not satisfied. So people wanted to move to a different area. So we started developing rural areas, and we identified the point of growth and identified those places where we wanted to build different facilities and infrastructure. Not because, for example, there's an excellent school nearby, and you know, sometimes it's easier to bring children to the school rather than build a new one. So we redistributed the volume of financial aid. So we use project financing and city councils. This really helps. So now any project can be initiated by anybody. It could be a public organization or the leader of the rural area or the senior citizen. So this initiative will come to the project funding pool, but it has to go through several filters. For example, sectoral filter that helps us understand whether it's worthy creating the facility there. Then the strategic development department filter, the filter set by the Committee of Urban Planning, so that it was clear how the area would be developed further. And finally, only a very good initiative would reach the top, reviewed by the governor. Those initiatives that have a right to be developed, and we know that those initiatives will all be supported by population. So it becomes a political aspect when we come up with the initiative to people. We understand that they would be supporting them by 100%. Now, the second project that we started implementing was people's budget. So this was a social project when we co-fund all the initiatives started by people. So there can be minor social programs, for example, building wells, building fire reservoirs, some lamps. So it's related to amenities. And we funded 50% of all the costs. For example, if the rural population already collected some money, then we would invest 50% with our municipal budget.
Now the situation with the budget has improved significantly. This is why people's budget, in terms of initiating people's budget, it turned into people's construction side. But we decided to choose the questions that come up most often, some fire safety ponds, and lighting areas, lighting streets, creating roads, quality roads. It's an analog of Russian program, but it refers to municipal and regional roads. But we finance directly. Where we see some areas, where we see some points of growth, let me get back to the previous slide. We decided to choose such an approach where we have changed the investment legislation of our national approach from the territorial approach of development of territories. We created tax benefits for agglomerations because we understand that it will develop and businesses presented there. And this is the Chiripovets area of advanced development, and it's a mono city, a single industry city. And another single industry city where we have attraction of investors, etc. And in the east and in the west, you see that there are no agglomerations and points of growth are fewer there. This is why with regional legislation, with these regional laws, we create tax benefits and other benefits for these areas. Vitaly Valeryevich, the time is running up. So this approach gives us a chance to accumulate the funds that we need in specific points of growth. This is why when we're speaking about development of rural areas, first of all, to us, these points of growth that are already available. Can I interrupt you and ask you a question? Don't you think that there are a lot of points of growth? Well, if you look at the map, there are many points of growth. You can define them easily. Yelena said that for rural areas, you should create 50% of all areas that will be well equipped, at least gas pipelines and electricity supply. Gas supply and electricity supply. For us, primarily, it is gas supply because water supply is almost available almost everywhere. Electricity is available almost everywhere. Sewage is available almost everywhere. This is why points of growth to us are those points where gas is available or will become available soon. Colleagues, thank you very much. I think we should speed up a little bit. We will have more time for discussions. Let me give the floor to Sergei Nikolaevich Vodozhenko. Sergei Nikolaevich, in your experience of development of territories, not the local territories, but of a big macro region that has united one of the largest constituents of Russia, Krasnoyarsky constituent, and got added up with a few other ones. So what is the result of this big macro region? For many, it's not clear, and for me, for instance, it's not clear what projects should be supported, how they should be supported, how does it function. Macro region is the Yenisei macro region. Apart from Krasnodar and Khakassia, we have Irkutsk region there as well, and we have an investment project of Yenisei area of Siberia, and we're going to increase it to macro regional. We're going to merge efforts with the Ministry of Economic Development, and together we're going to develop this macro region. In the beginning, our processes were duplicated, and then we're going in parallel. We were trying to get the Yenisei part of Siberia to the federal level. But we're working on avoiding this duplication. Irkutsk has submitted an application to join this macro region. Speaking about comprehensive investment project for the Yenisei region of Siberia. This is an initiative that includes 32 projects in it. They are implemented in Krasnodarsky Krai, Khakassia, and Tiva, and it's done according to the decree of Russian Federation, and the budget is almost 2 trillion rubles. So these are very large projects, different initiatives in different areas. It's in oil production and coal production and different metallurgic areas and timber and chemical industry and the travel industry, so on and so forth. So all the range of different economically development industries. We have covered them in our region. So today we are executing these investment projects. We're doing everything possible to execute these projects as soon as possible, to provide some support measures to cover for the deficiency areas. And of course, we understand that given the fact that this project is very large scale, there are many questions related to implementation, and many of them are related to federal level. And we are responsible for them, and we know that we can extrapolate them to other macro regions. We can share this information with other macro regions. There are two challenges that we're getting faced with. First is regulatory, and second, funding. Speaking about the first chunk, about the regulatory aspect, about investments management, about fostering investment projects. Here we see many challenges that we get faced with. Every project is unique. In the last year, we have numerously been faced with such situations when we had to introduce adjustments to tax code, to federal legislation related to methodology of calculating different norms. We had to change legislation related to regional investment projects. We got faced with the situation that there is no support stipulated there for brownfields. A brownfield project when the company does not build something from scratch, because it's very convenient to take out a loan, and they wouldn't like to create a new legal entity that doesn't have some credit history. It's not under legislation now, and the project is skidding and cannot be implemented. Another challenge related to tax rates for different projects in certain industries. We have to regulate it as well, because when there is one tax for metallurgy projects or oil projects or nickel and metallurgic projects, so there's one tax in one area and another tax in another area. There are many of these mismatches, many challenges, and in the future, I guess, there are going to be more and more different questions and issues to be regulated. We see that tariffs must be regulated in different constituents. We have different tariff and pricing, and investors, when they're considering different constituents, they see that their costs are going to be different because tariffs are different, and of course they're making a decision according to this information. We're implementing a number of projects in different constituents. It would be correct, it would be the right thing to do if we make a flat tariff. So there's a certain practice that has been there, and the matter of tariffs is very serious. But we are coming up with mechanisms within investment projects to create certain conditions for tariffs, for power supply, for heat supply, etc. We understand that for investment projects we can apply such a format as energy offshore, when at a certain stage tariffs would be minimum. We're getting faced with a difficulty that it's difficult to raise foreign investments for strategically important areas of our country. However, we understand that if we execute a certain approach, we can reach a good result. And we can execute some big industrial projects without any threat without any insecurity for our country. Many authorities are currently on the federal level, and in order to implement an investment project, we have to spend a lot of sources and a lot of time, particularly. And time is really critical for an investment project. And we see that some authorities should be decentralized, should be passed to regional level, or maybe it should be a methodology of two keys, and it relates to land, to property relations. So there are many peculiarities here. Overall, I guess the investment projects that we need so much right now, that the country needs, we must foresee some green corridors, some special format, special regime, when all expert assessments, when all the permissions they need to be granted, when all the support that should be granted, they should be radically, dramatically decreased. The timelines should be decreased. I think it is a real thing to do. We can do it. We just need to work on regulations and mechanisms and make sure it happens, especially when we invite foreign investors and they take a very close look at all the opportunities they have here, and they get intimidated by the timelines. When Chinese come here and they ask, how long will it take to build a plant here? We tell them that today, while you don't have land ownership, while you don't have any supply of energy, or while you don't have water supply, while the project has not been approved, it will take at least 2 years. And if we try really hard, it will take 18 months. It scares them away. It's a shock for them. So summarizing it, I would like to say that our country right now needs an investment code which would set out all the rules and all the regulations related to investments. And all the legislations that are available in the state would be mentioned there so that we could make them more flexible, more available and affordable in terms of investment projects. Speaking about funding, of course, we get faced with the situation that there are many support tools for investment projects, and it's great that some of them are industry-related, some of them are not industry-related, depending on the scale of the investor, on the scale of the project. But we see that there are some gaps, some white spots. There is a great investment project, it's very specific, but it doesn't fall into certain tools that are available right now. For instance, Industry Development Fund does not provide sources for companies that are working in commodity industry. For instance, in Taimyr, coal production, it is impossible to implement this project without some financial benefits and stimuli, without some state program. Speaking about tourism, for travel projects, support is provided only by agency for tourism that subsidizes infrastructure for clusters. But we know some infrastructural projects in tourism that need subsidies for capex. They need subsidies for interest rates. When we consider support measures for different corporations, we get faced with the fact that very few cases when investors are larger than our companies. The most evident miss out today in regulation and funding and in opportunities for further development. There are no clear mechanisms of funding and infrastructure for investment projects that have inter-regional character. For instance, in the Northeast, we have deposits of nickel and copper, and there is no highway there is no road, and you need to build a road of 130 kilometers, and you need to build another road from Irkutsk region. Question: what should be done so that inter-regional projects are funded, so that it's possible to fund inter-regional projects, so they don't get faced with problems? There's a simple mechanism: investment fund, development fund, that can be created in every macro region. And it could take all the tools that are available now, and in partnership with development institutions, they could use them and apply them. And we also could add their additional support tools. And this fund could be cooperating in terms of infrastructure, regardless of the region where this infrastructure will be located. This tool has been used in the previous iteration. For instance, in Krasnodar region, when we were executing the project, this foundation was working well, and there was a full funding, and economic development is going on perfectly well in this region thanks to this. This is why our stake is on this tool. Overall, as it has been mentioned today, state program for macro region, I believe it's a very important tool that is in need. It must set out KPIs, goals and objectives, a specific action plan. In this case, we will not just support investment projects, we will provide comprehensive development of a macro region. And this is what we should get to finally. Since we're speaking about development institutions and different support measures, I would like to ask a question to Andrei Krepach. What's your view on opportunities and limitations of development institutions in these kinds of projects or other projects that have been discussed with agglomerations and rural development? development institutions, well, when the state makes a decision to develop different regions or constituents, when some strategic decisions are made, just like those strategic decisions as the Yenisei part of Siberia, as colleagues have mentioned, as long as there's a presidential decree and a comprehensive solution to develop Angara and the Yenisei macro region. And as it was mentioned at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in the Central and Eastern Siberia, then of course development institutions can play a big part, they can help. But these institutions are very different. There is a regional network of funds that selects projects, and when they select a project, there is always an opinion of the regional fund. However, the decision is made in the center. And this foundation cannot cover everything. They are really focusing on processing industries and refining industries. They have certain programs dedicated to that and to military and defense projects. Corporation of Small Business Development also has a regional network, and it has regional funds and state guarantees, etc. Speaking about WEB, it has a different structure. It doesn't have a regional network. It used to be a system of regional establishments, regional representative offices. Maybe it shouldn't have been done, but there are regional managers. But indeed, in its activity, we primarily see industry related approach or big projects related approach. But this spatial, this territory component is there, and it's been increasing now, and it's related to a few points. First, there are a few subsidiaries, the Far East Development Fund, and there's a corporation of the Northern Caucasus. So it's regional funds for macro regions that are considering these projects with involvement of WEB and local authorities. I can't say to what extent they're being efficient, but the Foundation for Development of the Far East, after a few years of being snoozing, right now it's waking up and starting to work quite actively and executing projects and executing the state program. I agree that related to the Yenisei part of Siberia and related to macro region or a group of macro regions in Central and Eastern Siberia, what is needed is a corporation of development or some project office and some tools, and this corporation must have enough capital. And WEB involvement is needed there, and some budget funds, and the investment fund that used to be there, that was taking part in the South Angaria and different power plants. And the Siberian project related to timber, they were implemented thanks to this fund exactly, or it would be hard to implement without it. So these funds would really be needed there. There should be a management team, there should be a methodology to select projects. And these projects must be selected according to a different methodology compared to what banks usually do.
Because sometimes they follow the logic pursued by the banks. You should provide collateral, then you'll get loans, and then even though we try to stick to diversification, develop pharmaceutical industry, machine building industry, but still Sergei mentioned that it's very important to have an overall vision as to how this project fits into the territorial development. Vologda region was a very good example because it's very important to see what all those projects bring to the region overall and what kind of connections there are between different projects. For example, we understand that our interregional links are quite limited. So when we try to resolve bigger issues, it doesn't happen easily. So we have to fill in this management vacuum. So the Institution of Development for micro-region and different financial instruments that are being used should be targeted towards that goal. Now getting back to web. So when Igor joined the web team, we started focus on the development of urban environment. So web, being an enormous institution, focuses on larger cities. It cannot reach out to small towns or rural areas, but still it's a very important aspect because it's important to see not just the big production and added value, but also how the environment is being changed. For example, WEB is developing a master plan for the development of Nizhny Novgorod. Then there is a strategy for city general development, and this is related to the leasing of transport infrastructure, trams, buses, but it needs to be tied in with the plan of infrastructure development. So we have this program for 104 cities. So this should be taken into account because also it involves smart city management and the modernization and upgrade of boiler units, safety and security systems. And again, it's not only about just giving software, and it has to be a comprehensive solution for the smart city. So it's part of digital economy. So WEB has this as a priority. And another thing is that the Institution of Development can't work on its own. Success is determined by the interaction with regional authorities and the quality of governance that the region has. As I understand it, there is an inter-budgetary transfers and the management of funds, so it can be sensitive for some institutions of development, because there are certain funds that remain in the budget, and of course this has to be returned. So there are subsidies for leveling the budget amount, and if we are to consider the opportunity of airlines development that has to be subsidized from the regions, then it should involve a long-term planning, not just for 2 or 3 years. And WEB, as an institution of development, is interested in this work. But if we want to make a plan for Far East and Yakutia, we have to develop the plan of routes and the scenario of their subsidizing. So it should be planned at least for 5 years, and it depends not only on the institution of development, but it also requires changes in the management of budget funds and transfer the remains of budgetary funds between different regions. I would like to ask you a provocative question about a completely different thing. You said that you are preparing a program for supporting Central Siberia and Eastern Siberia. Maybe similar programs would appear for other strategically important regions. Maybe this should develop further and involve more regions, not just Yenisei part of Siberia, but other regions as well. Let's just complete one program at least. You know, there are so many programs, but they have to function effectively. So we have many regions, and all the federal districts adopted the strategies. They had some state programs. Yakutia was involved in the mid of 2000s, so there was a Republican program for production facilities. So let's just implement some of the programs fully, because if we now focus on Yenisei region, then we should do this. And it's not only about the range of projects. I don't want to make comments. 2 or 3 trillions. And anyway, it's not the first time that we make these lists. You know, we have had this experience. One region began to build a cement plant, but they could load it only up to 30%. So this is the task of the region and the corporation of development. So maybe in the future, when we develop the system of macro regions development, we'll have these instruments for all. And just the way our colleagues showed before, sometimes we focus on municipality level, but all the interests of different levels have to be tied together. And let's take Khakassia or Novosibirsk, Tomsk, the development of innovative cluster. It has all be taken into consideration so that we used a comprehensive approach. So this mechanism should be used by macro regions overall. I think it was very natural, as if you handed over the floor to our next speaker. And the Center for Strategic Development has already started this work related to systematization of instruments and how they are reflected in the documents of strategic planning. I know that they came up with different initiatives related not only to city agglomerations, but larger complexes. We haven't yet seen it. So what could you tell us? Thank you. Hello, dear colleagues. I don't want to seem boring, but whenever we speak about financial plans and funding for the regions, it's important to understand who is the subject of this planning. Because one of the national objectives that is mentioned in the Order 94 by the President of the Russian Federation is to make it to the top 5 and sustain this. So there is not a single country based on commodity resources, whereas Yenisei region of Siberia, out of 32 mega projects, belongs either to commodity center or the sector of heavy industry. I don't have any objections against this, but anyway, metallurgy, coal mining, oil, it all sounds great, but you know, you mentioned Tomsk and Novosibirsk, urbanized zones. They are the future. And it's true that even on the federal level, we have been discussing this with Alexei and other colleagues. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not continuous, it's not clear how the system fits together and develops. Because there are some precedents of the interaction between the constituencies of the Russian Federation. They can become part of these innovations regions like Yekaterinburg and Chelyabinsk. And you know, they were lobbying their interests, but still they couldn't make it. So they, even though they developed their transport infrastructure, but it didn't bring much to the country. You know, we speak about long-term planning up to 2040. That's the one thing. Now, the second thing is when we speak about the federal level, we should clearly understand the priorities, and we should respond to the initiatives coming from the root grass level. So we do understand this. We are all adults. We all have children. And whenever children learn how to wear clothes and how to put on clothes, we want to help them because it has to be done quickly. We have to do it right now. So we want to take this hat and put ourselves to make it faster. But then it would mean that you will do the same until he or she is 50 years old. And that's what happens. I'm saying this as the president of the Guild of Urban Planners and being the chair of the committee for Pskovsk region, which dealt about spatial development. I can say that I had not a single document related to territorial planning in 2010. So I already knew before entering into my job that you have only 2% of job completion. So I tried to push for the subsidies. Then I made an agreement with FAS that I could delegate it, and municipality won't suffer because of that. And I'm really grateful because FAS did what I asked them for. Some other examples were quite in a different situation. So anyway, we had trainings and workshops. We learned a lot from mistakes. It took a lot of my time. The most important thing was to make people aware of this and think about it. I can say that it happens like that in 85% of the regions. But if we focus on a long-term prospect, this is not the right way to go. Then the next point is related to the degree of freedom. If we compare the years of 2012 and 2013 with what we have today, the situations are quite different. The main resource in the municipalities and the region is ground, the land. So we analyzed the reduction of regional and municipal opportunities when we worked with municipal and regional property. It all happened on the federal level. You know, everybody wants economic growth, but we don't trust. So we had to hold auctions. So who's the granny in this situation? No, the granny featured in the previous episode. This is related to the center of competencies. So somebody should monitor this, right? The federal center should delegate this responsibilities. Well, we decided to transfer everything related to property to a different sphere. So FAS was responsible for that. But then we realized that in Germany they built beautiful parks with municipal land, and municipality had 25% of shares in this company. And the industrial park was great. The investors put their money, and even the municipality doesn't get any profit from that. Still, there are like 20 enterprises located into that industrial park. Unfortunately, here everything is different. If you want to allocate a plot of land, it will be hell for you. You'll have to do such a lot of work. And we're trying to do the best. We're trying to develop competition. But unfortunately, we don't get much as a result. And at the plenary session, the governor of Samara region said that the objectives can be very different. We want to increase the scope of residential development, but we decrease the funding. For example, now we can't just exchange the plots of land because this regulation was cancelled. So now we are trying, once we make all the calculations, it becomes clear that there are very many hurdles. So, speaking about these initiatives, would it be possible to draw a document so that it could include all the initiatives and approved? Well, as to our authorities, we always discuss this, we speak about it, we work with the association for the development of municipal areas headed by Ivan Tsarsky. So it's related to municipal authorities. I'll just take a step away from this, and it's related to small business. Of course, it's not the federal level that should deal with the small business. Mayors should deal with it. There's no other way. So the mayors should deal with it. The mayors should know all their small businesses. And if you work in this way, you know it very well. But in 90% of cases, mayors are not aware of the businesses located in their areas. We open statistics books and we see the turnovers of the big enterprises. So all the data for municipal area include the information only about medium and large businesses. Nothing is mentioned about small businesses. So it should be done on the municipal level. And then the municipalities will get an extra source of funding and an extra stimuli. If we give them subsidies from the federal level, we know that the medium business would become a small business. They break down their companies in order to get these subsidies from the federal level. So there should be some incentives to stimulate the process. So I hope that something will be implemented. Now I would like to give the floor to Dmitry Zemlyansky. You are the head of the structure that has serviced Ministry of Economic Development historically. So how do you see the situation? Could it all be packed so that the Ministry of Economic Development could understand it and could come up with some initiatives? I'm afraid I don't have much time.
The Minister of Economic Development does see the initiatives. They do expect the initiatives, and they will confirm that the current team of Ministry of Economic Development does hear the territories, does hear experts in different discussions. If possible, using the opportunity that I'm one of the final speakers, I would like to add some ointment into here. Point 1, till 2035. Our national project is till 2024, but we are planning till 2035. The budget is for a year, and it takes 6 months to execute the money properly. Until this gap is covered at least somehow, all other discussions make no sense. Because you need to execute the money in 6 months, and people are rushing with projects that are already there, that are already available, and we're not even talking about any planning here. Second, we have a huge number of tools and institutions where you can get sources to develop territories. Tools are in abundance, but the entrance is like a bottleneck, and there's an abundance of territories, of enterprises, of municipalities, so it's really hard for all of these entities to squeeze into this bottleneck. The bright example is a national project to increase labor productivity. There is an abundance of projects and enterprises with a good turnover, with a turnover that fits into requirements. And they can't come into this project. The idea is great, the idea is cool, but to make it work, we need to fine-tune it properly. Point 3, a very interesting experience of the Vologda region, where you have 10 filters on the path of local initiatives for it to get implemented. There are 10, of course I'm joking, not 10, I'm exaggerating. Today, despite the strategy of spatial development, really in the country, at the federal level, we have one filter, the industry-related filter. And when these industry-related filters, and there are 100 of them with an enormous number of subsidies, when they are overlapped with each other, then in a real territory we have a non-coordinated system. Like we can build a school, but we do not build the road because it does not fall into this or that project. This is a notorious situation, and these filters, I'm against arranging 10 filters. We need to shrink, we need to contract the number of filters. I had the honor to take part in one of the discussions in one of the 10 of our constituents that does not have enough level of development in the region of Altai. Manually, they just take one project, they add it to another project, and however, these are actually different projects, but in order to submit a request, they put one project into another, just to make sure that at least something will get implemented. Point 4. On a municipal level, it's not clear what. There's some mess there. And most importantly, I'm really scared of it when performance indicators of different officials are reported further, out of hundreds of projects, only 10 can be counted really on the level of municipalities. And I'm really scared that municipalities will be the ones to blame. We will find them guilty, ultimately. And 2 more points. One of the resources that we keep on forgetting about is the resource of business. Businesses invest in developing the territory regardless of the desires of regional authorities or municipal authorities. They invest in development of regions. Traditional example, single industry towns. There's only one industry, only one enterprise. Budget equals 0, and apart from social responsibility of the company, corporate social responsibility, there's nothing else happens. There are no other sources. And these single industries, it's important for them to see that authorities are moving together with them. They're moving in parallel. It's important for them to know that not only their social responsibilities is at play there, but the state is also contributing. And final point I wanted to mention. speaking about the needed sources and the volume of sources we need and the tools that we have on hand. We're speaking about construction, about building this or that. We're never speaking about resources to support, function, and to maintain what has been built. And these sources, like we presume, we take it for granted that municipalities must have these funds for maintenance, and this is a big drawback. Thank you very much. Alexey Anatolievich, maybe you have a few words to add. Actually, there is a time limit of this discussion, and we would like to have to say a lot. But in conclusion, I wanted to say that actually everything that has been mentioned is very dear to us, and we shared all these points of view, and there are many, many problems. Every presentation emphasized the problems. The step that has been made is the right step. It's the step in the right direction. Dmitry Yurievich is one of the developers. For some reason, he doesn't mention it. Maybe he's being modest, but he's one of the developers of this spatial development strategy. So we have sowed, and now we need to plant it. We need to make sure that this plant grows and that the harvest is good. And the piloting system and the maintenance system, and we're developing it now, inter-industry development. We will include their programs of natural monopolies. Sometimes they exist here and there in different regions, so that there is this comprehensive approach, so that it doesn't exist in a way, as you have explained, like the school has been built, but the road has not been built, and in 10 years, the population is not there anymore. They have moved to urban areas. So the purpose is to develop comprehensively, holistically. Colleagues, on my side, I wanted to add, we have spoken about different regions and constituents. Territories are mentioned currently as constituents, but there are comprehensive investment regions, different types of territories, different agglomerations, points of growth, rural and urban environment. We have spoken about all of this. Apart from that, we have spoken about different tools. So we spoke not only about funding, but we also discussed incentives, about the need to change the regulatory environment, the need to create specialized funds or some project offices, the need to prioritize properly the decisions that have been made. We need to introduce new tools, if it's not investment in future construction, but also initiative budgeting. I also love the question about manually putting projects together, putting a few projects together in order to include them on the list, to put them on the list and to get them executed. So there are many, many tools of management and financial development of territories. Thank you very much to everybody. I hope this discussion was a success and it was fruitful. Thank you.